My name is Brad Thompson, and I'm 57 years old. For most of my life, I thought I knew what it meant to be a good father. I worked double shifts as a plumber, scraped together every penny I could find, and sacrificed my own comfort so my daughter Sarah could have the opportunities I never did. But 3 months before her wedding, everything I thought I knew about family love and money got turned upside down by a single phone call that would change both our lives forever. Before I tell you how a single envelope changed everything between my daughter and me, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories that will make you think twice about family and money. Trust me, what happens next will shock you just as much as it shocked me. Let me take you back to where this all began. Sarah was 8 years old when my wife Linda passed away from cancer. I remember standing in that hospital hallway, holding my little girl's hand, knowing that from that moment forward, it would just be the two of us against the world. The doctor's words about treatment costs and final bills seemed to echo endlessly in my mind, but all I could focus on was Sarah's tear-stained face looking up at me, asking when Mommy was coming home. Those early years were brutal. I was a plumber making $35,000 a year, and suddenly I had to figure out how to be both mother and father to a grieving child. I remember working 3 jobs some weeks, taking on weekend emergency calls just to pay for Sarah's piano lessons. She had this natural talent for music, and even though every $20 lesson meant I'd eat peanut butter sandwiches for dinner that week, seeing her face light up when she played made every sacrifice worth it. Sarah grew up understanding struggle, but she never let it define her. She studied harder than any kid I knew, earned a full scholarship to State University, and graduated summa cum laude with a degree in accounting. I was so proud watching her walk across that stage, knowing that everything I'd given up had helped get her there. She landed a good job at a respected firm, started making more money than I ever dreamed of, and for the first time in years, I could breathe a little easier. Then she met Marcus. Marcus Wellington was everything I wasn't. Harvard Law School, graduate family money going back 3 generations. The kind of confidence that comes from never having to check your bank balance before buying groceries. When Sarah first brought him home for dinner, I could see the way she looked at him. It was the same way she used to look at those fancy doll houses in store windows when she was little, like she was seeing a life she'd always wanted, but never thought she could have. At first I was happy for her. Marcus seemed kind enough, polite, respectful. But slowly I started noticing changes in Sarah. She began talking differently about my work, referring to it as Dad's little plumbing thing, instead of the career that had put her through college. She started suggesting I might want to upgrade my wardrobe when we went out together, and I caught her apologizing to Marcus once for the fact that we were meeting at a chain restaurant instead of somewhere more upscale. These changes were subtle, gradual. I told myself it was natural for her to want to fit into Marcus's world. I convinced myself that this was just part of growing up, of finding her place in a social circle I'd never been able to provide access to. But deep down, something was shifting between us, and I could feel my little girl slipping away from the man who'd raised her. 3 months before Sarah's wedding on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, my phone rang while I was under Mrs. Henderson's kitchen sink, fixing a stubborn leak. The voice on the other end belonged to a lawyer named Robert Steinberg from downtown, and his words stopped my world in its tracks. "Mr. Thompson, I'm calling regarding the estate of your uncle, Henry Thompson. I'm afraid he passed away last month, and you're listed as his sole beneficiary." Uncle Henry. I hadn't spoken to him in over 30 years. Not since the bitter family argument that split our family apart when I was 25. Henry had been my father's younger brother, brilliant with numbers and real estate, but we'd fallen out over something so petty I could barely remember the details now. Pride and stubbornness had kept us apart for decades, and now he was gone. "I don't understand," I told Mr. Steinberg. "Henry and I haven't talked in years. Are you sure there isn't some mistake?" The lawyer's voice was gentle but firm. "No mistake, Mr. Thompson. Your uncle left very specific instructions. He's bequeathed his entire estate to you, which includes properties, investments, and liquid assets totaling approximately $9.2 million. I nearly dropped the wrench I was holding. $9 million. The number didn't seem real, couldn't possibly be real. I'd never seen that much money in one place, never even imagined having access to that kind of wealth. Mrs. Henderson was calling from upstairs, asking if everything was all right, but I couldn't find my voice to answer. "There is one condition," Mr. Steinberg continued. "According to your uncle's will, you must keep this inheritance confidential for a minimum of 6 months. He wanted you to, and I quote, learn to live with money before others learn you have it. He believed this would help you understand the true impact of wealth on relationships." The condition seemed strange, but then again, Henry had always been eccentric. Mr. Steinberg arranged for me to meet with a financial advisor named Mark Davidson, someone Henry had specifically chosen to guide me through this transition. Mark was a thoughtful man in his 60s who'd worked with Henry for years, and his first piece of advice was sobering. "Brad," he said during our first meeting, "your uncle wasn't being cruel with that 6-month rule. He'd seen too many families torn apart by sudden wealth. Money has a way of revealing people's true nature, and not always in pleasant ways. He wanted you to observe how people treat you now, while they still see you as the plumber you've always been." I signed all the necessary paperwork, watched as millions of dollars appeared in accounts I'd never dreamed of having, but kept going to work every day, kept living in my same modest apartment, kept being the same Brad Thompson everyone knew. The hardest part was keeping the secret from Sarah, especially as wedding planning intensified, and I could see her stressing about costs. But Mark's words kept echoing in my mind. Henry had been smart about human nature, and maybe this test period would prove that our family's love was stronger than money. Maybe it would show that Sarah valued our relationship for what it truly was, not what it could financially provide. I had no idea how wrong I was about to be proven. Sarah and Marcus's wedding planning began with enthusiasm and quickly escalated into something that felt more like a military operation than a celebration of love. They'd chosen a budget of $80,000, which to me seemed astronomical, but Marcus assured Sarah it was modest by family standards. I listened to their conversations about venues, caterers, and flower arrangements, each line item representing more money than I used to make in several months. One evening in April, Sarah sat me down at her kitchen table with a spreadsheet that looked more complex than tax documents. Her finger traced down rows of numbers as she explained how costs were being divided between families. Marcus's parents were covering the reception venue and catering. Sarah was handling her dress and the photography, and then she got to the line that made my stomach drop. "Dad, I need you to contribute $15,000 for the flowers, music, and transportation," she said, matter-of-factly. "I know it's a lot, but this is a once-in-a-lifetime event, and I want everything to be perfect." $15,000. I had $9 million sitting in accounts she didn't know about, but as far as Sarah knew, I was still a plumber living paycheck to paycheck. The request meant I'd have to take out a loan, probably a second mortgage on my small house, just to help pay for flowers that would be thrown away the next day. "Sarah, honey," I said carefully, "that's more than I make in 6 months. Could we maybe look at some less expensive options?" Her face changed in a way I'd never seen before, a mixture of disappointment and embarrassment that cut right through me. "Dad Marcus's family is spending $40,000 on just the venue. I can't ask you to contribute more than you're able, but I also can't have our side of the wedding looking cheap in comparison." I ended up taking out a personal loan at 18% interest, signing papers that committed me to years of payments, all while having enough money in another account to buy the entire wedding venue. The cognitive dissonance was almost unbearable, but I kept telling myself this was temporary, that in 3 months I could reveal the truth and we'd laugh about this strange time when I was secretly wealthy. But the financial stress was only part of the problem. Marcus's mother, Helen Wellington, had opinions about everything, and most of those opinions seemed designed to remind me of my place in the social hierarchy. During a dinner at their country club, she made comments about hoping the different backgrounds wouldn't cause too much culture clash at the wedding. She suggested I might be more comfortable if they arranged for appropriate attire to be provided for me, since she knew dress codes at nice venues can be confusing for people not used to formal events. Each comment was delivered with a smile and a tone that made it impossible to directly object without seeming oversensitive, but the message was clear. I was the charity case, the father who couldn't quite provide the lifestyle their son deserved, the man who needed their help to avoid embarrassing everyone. The worst part was watching Sarah's reaction to these exchanges. Instead of defending me, she seemed to agree with Helen's assessments. She started making comments about my appearance, suggesting I might want to dress up a little more when we went out together. She began apologizing for my truck when Marcus rode with us, explaining that it was functional but not very stylish. I watched my daughter slowly becoming ashamed of the father who'd worked 3 jobs to pay for her college, and every day the weight of my secret grew heavier. I had the power to change everything to show Helen Wellington exactly who she was dealing with, but Henry's condition held me back. 3 more months, I told myself. Just 3 more months, and then we'll see who these people really are. The night before Sarah's wedding, the rehearsal dinner at Marcus's family's country club was supposed to be an intimate celebration. Instead, it felt like a tribunal, where I was the defendant in a case I didn't understand. Helen had spared no expense on the venue. A private dining room overlooking the golf course, where crystal glasses caught the light from an elaborate chandelier, and every detail screamed old money elegance. I sat at the end of the main table wearing my best suit that suddenly felt cheap and ill-fitting in this environment. The other guests were Marcus's relatives and family friends, people with titles like doctor and judge, who spoke casually about vacation homes and investment portfolios. I tried to make conversation, but every attempt seemed to highlight the gulf between my world and theirs. When Helen stood up to make her toast champagne glass glinting in her manicured hand, I should have known something was coming. Her speech started traditionally enough, talking about how wonderful it was to welcome Sarah into their family, how excited they were about the future. But then her tone shifted slightly, and she began talking about second chances and rising above circumstances. "We're so proud of Sarah for everything she's accomplished," Helen said, her eyes finding mine across the table. "It takes real character to overcome a difficult upbringing and create success from nothing. Marcus has always been drawn to people who've had to struggle for what they have, and Sarah is such an inspiring example of what's possible when someone is willing to work hard and accept help from those who can provide better opportunities." The implication was clear to everyone in that room. Sarah had been rescued from poverty by their son, lifted up from a life of limation into their world of privilege. And I, the plumber father, was the difficult circumstances she'd had to overcome. I waited for Sarah to say something to object to this characterization of our life together, to remind everyone that struggle and modest means didn't equal shame. Instead, she smiled and nodded, raising her glass to toast Helen's words as if they were a compliment rather than an insult. After dinner, as we stood outside the club waiting for our cars, Sarah pulled me aside. Her wedding dress fitting had been that afternoon, and she was glowing with excitement about the next day. But her words cut deeper than any of Helen's subtle put-downs. "Dad, I need to ask you something important about tomorrow," she said, her voice taking on the tone she used at work when she was being professional rather than personal. "I know Helen can be a little particular about appearances, and this is really important to Marcus's family. Could you just try to blend in tomorrow and not make it obvious that you're just a plumber? I don't want anything to take attention away from the celebration." Just a plumber. The words hit me like a physical blow. This was my daughter, the little girl I'd held while she cried over scraped knees. The teenager I'd stayed up all night helping with college application essays, the young woman I'd been proud to call my greatest accomplishment. And now she was asking me to hide who I was, to be ashamed of the work that had provided for her entire life. I drove back to my hotel room that night in a fog of hurt and anger. The numbers in my bank account felt surreal, meaningless against the weight of my daughter's rejection. I called Mark Davidson from my hotel room, my voice shaking as I told him what had happened. "I want to tell her," I said. "I want to tell all of them. Let's see how they treat the plumber when they find out he has more money than their entire family combined." Mark's voice was gentle but firm. "Brad, you've come this far. One more day. Let this play out tomorrow and see what happens. Your uncle was wise about human nature. Give Sarah one last chance to show you who she really is before you make any decisions you can't take back." I hung up the phone, knowing that tomorrow would change everything between my daughter and me, one way or another. I just had no idea how dramatically those changes would unfold. Sarah's wedding day dawned with the kind of perfect weather that seemed orchestrated by the universe for maximum irony. Clear skies, gentle breeze, 72 degrees ideal conditions for what should have been one of the happiest days of both our lives. Instead, I woke up in my hotel room, feeling like I was preparing for a performance where I'd forgotten all my lines. The ceremony was held at Meadowbrook Manor, a sprawling estate venue with manicured gardens and a chapel that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. I arrived early, hoping to have a few quiet moments with Sarah before the chaos began. But she was already surrounded by bridesmaids, makeup artists, and Helen, who seemed to have appointed herself as wedding day director. "Oh, Brad, you're here," Helen said when she saw me approaching the bridal suite. "How lovely. Sarah's just getting ready, but we have everything under control. Maybe you could wait in the main hall. We'll call you when it's time for photos." I was being dismissed from my own daughter's preparation time, relegated to waiting in the lobby like any other guest. Sarah glanced up from her makeup chair, gave me a quick wave, and went back to her conversation about bouquet placement. No hug, no special father-daughter moment, just a casual acknowledgement that I was present. The ceremony itself was beautiful, I had to admit. Sarah looked radiant in her dress. Marcus seemed genuinely happy, and the setting was everything a young bride could dream of. I walked her down the aisle, handed her over to Marcus, and took my assigned seat in the third row. Not the front row where most fathers of the bride typically sit. Helen had explained that the front rows were reserved for immediate family, a category that apparently didn't include me, despite having raised Sarah for the past 25 years. During the photo session after the ceremony, the photographer, a nervous young man named Kevin, kept trying to arrange family groupings. He'd start to place me next to Sarah, then Helen would intervene with suggestions about better lighting or more balanced compositions that somehow always resulted in me being positioned at the edge of the frame or excluded entirely from the more intimate shots. "Let's get one with just the Wellington family," Helen suggested during what felt like the 100th photo, "and then maybe one with Sarah and her father off to the side." Off to the side? Like I was an afterthought, a minor character in the story of my own daughter's wedding. Sarah didn't object to any of these arrangements. If anything, she seemed relieved not to have to navigate the social awkwardness of fully including me in her new family's traditions. The reception was held in the Manor's grand ballroom, with round tables decorated in white and gold, each centerpiece probably costing more than I used to spend on groceries in a month. I found my assigned seat at table 12, tucked away near the kitchen doors, with a collection of distant relatives and family friends I'd never met. Sarah and Marcus's table was front and center, surrounded by the wedding party and the most important guests. From my distant vantage point, I watched my daughter laugh and dance, accept congratulations and well wishes, pose for countless photos with people who mattered in her new life. Occasionally, she'd glance in my direction and wave, but she never came over to check on me, never introduced me to the important people she was meeting, never included me in the conversations that were shaping her evening. When Marcus stood up to make his speech, I expected the traditional thanks to both families, the acknowledgement of parents and their sacrifices. He thanked his parents for their unwavering support and guidance, thanked Sarah's friends for helping her become the incredible woman she is today, and thanked everyone who helped make this celebration possible. But there was no mention of me, no recognition of the father who'd raised the bride. Sarah's speech was equally devastating. She talked about finding her soulmate, about the future she and Marcus would build together, about the wonderful new family she was joining. She thanked Helen for showing her what true elegance looked like, and Marcus's father for treating her like the daughter they'd always wanted. Again, no mention of the man who'd actually been her father for 25 years. I was getting ready to leave to slip out quietly and let them continue their celebration without the embarrassment of my presence when Marcus's cousin David approached my table. David was a private investigator I'd learned earlier, a fact that had made me vaguely uncomfortable during our brief introduction. "Mr. Thompson," he said, sliding into the empty chair next to me. "I wonder if we could have a quick conversation outside." My blood ran cold, but I followed him onto the terrace overlooking the gardens. David's expression was serious, professional, and slightly predatory in a way that made every instinct I had scream danger. "Helen asked me to do a little background research on Sarah's family," he began. "Just standard procedure for wealthy families when their children marry. Nothing personal, you understand, just making sure there weren't any surprises or potential issues." He paused, studying my face for a reaction. Imagine my surprise when I discovered that 3 months ago, a certain Bradford Thompson inherited $9.2 million from his uncle's estate. That's quite a coincidence, don't you think? The world seemed to tilt sideways. Everything I'd feared, everything Mark Davidson had warned me about, was happening at the worst possible moment, in the worst possible way. David's smile was sharp and knowing as he continued. "I'm curious, Mr. Thompson. Why would a man with that kind of wealth pretend to be a struggling plumber? Why would he watch his daughter stress about wedding costs while sitting on millions? Unless, of course, he was testing something. Or someone." Within minutes of David's revelation, I found myself surrounded by the very people who'd spent months treating me like a charity case. Helen had summoned Marcus and Sarah from the dance floor, and we stood in a tight circle on the terrace while the celebration continued obliviously behind us. "Is this true?" Helen demanded, her voice sharp with accusation. "Have you been lying to us about your financial situation this entire time?" Sarah's face was a mixture of shock, confusion, and growing anger. "Dad, what is he talking about? What inheritance? The moment I'd been dreading for months was here, but not at all how I'd imagined it would unfold. Instead of a private conversation where I could explain Uncle Henry's conditions and my reasons for waiting, I was being confronted like a criminal by people who'd never shown me an ounce of respect. "It's complicated," I began, but Helen cut me off. "Complicated? You've been deceiving our family for months. You sat there and watched Sarah struggle with wedding expenses while you had millions of dollars. What kind of father does that? The kind who wanted to see who his daughter really was," I said, my voice growing stronger as the initial shock wore off. "The kind who wondered if the people she was choosing to surround herself with would judge him differently if they knew he had money." Sarah stepped closer, her wedding dress rustling in the evening breeze. "How could you lie to me? How could you let me think you were struggling while you were secretly rich? Do you have any idea how humiliated I feel right now?" "Humiliated about what, Sarah?" I asked. "About having a father who worked honest jobs, about coming from a family that knew the value of money because we had to earn it. Or are you humiliated because your new family might think you married down when actually your father could buy and sell half the people in that ballroom?" Marcus had been quiet until now, but his expression had changed dramatically from the polite distance he'd always maintained to something that looked almost predatory. "This is unbelievable, Brad. You manipulated us. You made us think Sarah came from nothing, so we'd prove something to you." "I didn't have to make anyone think anything," I replied. "I've been the same person I've always been. The only thing that's changed is your knowledge of my bank account. And look how quickly your attitudes shifted the moment you found out." Helen's voice was icy. "Don't you dare try to turn this around on us. You're the one who's been living a lie." But I was done being defensive, done apologizing for who I was or who I'd always been. 3 months of watching my daughter grow ashamed of me, of being treated like I wasn't good enough for their world, of having my life's work dismissed as just plumbing, had built up a reservoir of hurt that was now transforming into clarity. "You want to know about lies?" I said, looking directly at Sarah. "The lie is pretending that money changes who a person is. I'm the same father who raised you, who worked multiple jobs to pay for your piano lessons, who stayed up all night helping you with homework. The only thing that's different is that now you know I don't need your new family's charity or approval." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the letter that Mark Davidson had given me, the one Uncle Henry had written to be read when the inheritance was revealed. "My uncle left me something besides money," I said, unfolding the handwritten pages. "He left me this." I began reading aloud, my voice carrying across the terrace. "To my nephew Brad, if you're reading this, then 6 months have passed, and you've learned what I hoped you would learn. Money doesn't change who people are, it reveals who they've always been. The people who treated you with respect when they thought you had nothing are the ones worth keeping in your life. The ones who only show you kindness after they learn about your wealth were never really your friends at all." Sarah's face was pale in the moonlight. "Dad, please let's just go inside and talk about this privately." "No, Sarah. We've had months to talk privately, and instead you spent that time becoming ashamed of the man who raised you. You spent it asking me to hide who I was, so I wouldn't embarrass you in front of people who judge others by their bank statements. The truth was pouring out now, months of suppressed hurt and observation spilling into the open. I watched you apologize for my truck, for my clothes, for my work. I watched you position yourself as far away from me as possible in wedding photos. I listened to your speech tonight, where you thanked everyone who mattered in your life, except the person who actually raised you. Marcus stepped forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in. Look, Brad, I think we can all agree this situation got out of hand. Why don't we start over now that we understand the real situation? The real situation. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. The real situation is that for months you've all treated me like I was beneath you, and now that you know I have money, you want to start over. Uncle Henry was right. Money reveals who people really are, and you've all shown me exactly who you are. The silence that followed my words was deafening, broken only by the distant sounds of the wedding celebration continuing inside. Sarah's carefully applied makeup was starting to run with tears, but I found that my heart, which had broken for her so many times over the past months, was finally beginning to feel something like peace. Here's what's going to happen. I said, my voice calm and steady for the first time all evening. I'm going to honor my uncle's wisdom about money and what it reveals about people. Sarah, you've shown me that you value wealth and social status more than the man who sacrificed everything for you. That's your choice, and you'll have to live with it. Helen started to speak, but I held up my hand. Mrs. Wellington, you've spent months making it clear that you consider me beneath your family's standards. Well, now you know that this plumber you've been condescending to could buy your country club membership as a casual expense. How does that change your opinion of me? Does my work suddenly become more respectable now that you know I don't need the money? Marcus looked uncomfortable as his mother struggled for a response. Brad, I think there have been misunderstandings on all sides. No misunderstandings, I replied. Perfect clarity. You've all shown me exactly how you treat people you consider socially inferior, and I've learned everything I need to know about your character. I turned back to Sarah, my daughter who looked so beautiful in her wedding dress and so much like a stranger. The $9 million will be going to establish a foundation for single parents, I announced. People who are struggling to raise children alone, who work multiple jobs and sacrifice their own comfort for their kids' futures. People who understand that a person's worth isn't measured by their bank account. Sarah's face crumpled. Dad, please don't do this. We can work this out. I'm sorry for how I acted, but I was just trying to fit in. Fit in where, Sra, with people who judge others by their wealth. With a family that hired a private investigator to check up on your background. Is that really the world you want to be part of? I looked around at all of them. These people who'd spent months making me feel small and unwelcome. I've spent 25 years being proud of my daughter, and 3 months watching her become ashamed of her father. Tonight I finally understand the difference between love and social climbing. David, who had started this confrontation, looked like he was regretting his decision to reveal the inheritance. Look, Mr. Thompson, maybe we all got off on the wrong foot here. No, David, you did exactly what Helen paid you to do. You revealed the truth. And the truth is that some people's love is conditional on circumstances they find acceptable. I began walking toward the exit, but turned back one final time. Sarah, when you figure out the difference between people who love you for who you are and people who love you for what you can provide them, you know where to find me. Until then, enjoy your new life with your new family. Just remember, when you need someone who will love you, whether you're rich or poor, successful or struggling, you gave that up tonight. 6 months later, Sarah called. Through tears, she told me that Marcus had left her for his law partner's daughter, someone with better social connections. Helen had stopped returning her calls the moment the divorce papers were filed. The people she'd tried so hard to impress had disappeared the moment she was no longer useful to them. We met at a small diner, the kind of place she used to love before she decided it wasn't elegant enough for her new life. She apologized, really apologized for the first time since childhood. She admitted that she'd lost herself, trying to become someone she thought Marcus's family would approve of. I told her about the foundation, how it was helping dozens of families every month. I told her about Linda, the volunteer coordinator, who'd become special to me, a woman who'd fallen in love with a plumber before she ever knew about the inheritance. I told her that forgiveness was possible, but our relationship would have to be rebuilt on honesty instead of pretense. The foundation is thriving now, providing scholarships, emergency assistance, and support for single parents across 3 states. Every check we write, every family we help, reminds me that Uncle Henry was right about money revealing character. The people worth having in your life are the ones who see your value regardless of your bank statement. Sarah and I are rebuilding our relationship slowly, carefully. She's learned to be proud of her roots again, to value substance over surface. But it took losing everything she thought she wanted to remember what she'd always had. Sometimes the greatest inheritance we can give our children isn't money, but the courage to choose love over greed, authenticity over acceptance, and character over convenience. Money will always reveal who people really are, but love, real love, sees who they can become. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have revealed the inheritance earlier, or would you have let it play out like I did? Share this story if it made you think about the difference between love and social climbing, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about family, money, and the choices that define us. Leave a comment about a time when someone's true character was revealed by how they treated people they thought had less than them. Thank you for listening. And remember, the richest people in life are often the ones who measure wealth by the quality of their relationships, not the size of their bank accounts.